The snowstorm had swallowed the woods whole. Trees stood like frozen sentinels, their limbs weighed down by the weight of silence. Amid this white deathscape, 3 young women hung from ropes tied under the beams of an old wooden structure, their heads low, their breath shallow, their wrists bound tight across chests wrapped in torn winter jackets. The wind tugged at their hair, their legs shook. The cold wasn't just outside, it had seeped into their bones. No screams, no signs. No one was ever supposed to find them out here. Ezekiel's Zeke, Kross moved like a shadow through the drifts, boots crunching softly against the snow. He hadn't meant to come this way. His truck had stalled miles back on a forest road nobody used anymore. But when Nix, his black and tan German shepherd, started pulling east into the woods, Zeke followed. Years in covert operations taught him to trust the instincts of creatures more honest than men. Nix was growling now, nose low to the ground, pacing, unsettled. Then he stopped. His ears shot up. He barked once. A warning. A discovery. Zeke's breath caught in his throat when he saw them. 3 women. Hanging. Alive but just barely. He moved fast but silent. Tactical. His gloved hands reached the first rope, slicing it clean with his blade. The girl collapsed into his arms, her body limp, her face frostbitten and bruised. Raven Blackwood, he'd learn later, eyes like storm clouds even half shut. Behind her was June Halley, barely 19, lips trembling, eyes flickering like a dying candle. The last was Lilith Rowe, older than the others and strangely calm, like someone who'd seen this before. Nix growled again, turning toward the trees. There was something out there. Zeke's heart rate kicked into high gear. This wasn't random. This wasn't cruelty for chaos. Someone had brought them here for a purpose, and that someone might still be watching. He whispered gently to the women as he worked, reassuring them, even if he didn't believe the words himself. "You're safe now," he muttered, eyes scanning the tree line. But he knew it wasn't true. Not yet. Somewhere beyond the white stillness, Silas the pastor Creed watched from the shadows, his breath invisible in the cold. He believed pain was a path to purity, that these women had to suffer before they could be free. What he didn't count on was a broken-down seal and a dog that smelled death. Zeke didn't have time to think. He worked on instinct, cutting each woman down with quiet efficiency. Their bodies hit the snow with soft thuds, too weak to stand, too numb to feel. He checked their pulses, faint, but there. He counted breaths. Raven's were shallow but steady. June's came in bursts like a wounded animal. Lilith didn't even shiver anymore. She just stared up at the gray sky like she was already halfway gone. "Stay with me," Zeke whispered, more to himself than to them. His hands moved fast, layering them in his own coat, his scarf, anything warm. The wind howled through the trees again. This time it didn't sound like nature, it sounded like laughter. Far away, twisted. Zeke's jaw clenched. He knew that sound. The enemy didn't always carry a weapon. Sometimes they carried faith or worse, delusion. Nix barked sharply, muscles tight, eyes locked on a cluster of pine to the northwest. Zeke followed the line of sight. Nothing moved. No footprints. But something was there. Watching. Waiting. He reached into his pack, pulled out a flare, and cracked it. A red glow painted the snow around them like blood. The warmth was minimal, but the light was vital. "Come on," he muttered, slinging Raven over his shoulder, while guiding June with one arm and pulling Lilith behind them. Nick stayed close, ears twitching at every sound. The cabin wasn't far, just a quarter-mile uphill, but in this storm, it felt like a mile through hell. Every step was a fight. The cold bit at Zeke's skin, turning sweat into ice. But he didn't stop. June stumbled twice. The second time, she screamed. No words, just raw terror. Zeke dropped to her side, held her close, and looked her dead in the eyes. "You're not dying out here. Not today." Her eyes were wild. She clutched at his arm, mouthing something over and over. Took a second to register. "The shepherd. He said we were lambs." Her voice broke. Zeke felt a chill deeper than the snow. That name again, the shepherd. Not a name. A symbol. A code. And it confirmed what Zeke feared. This wasn't random. It was organized. Ritualized. He had seen things like this overseas. Cells that believed pain was holy. But this wasn't Iraq or Syria. This was American soil. These women had been chosen. Prepared. Left to die in the snow as part of something larger. Something darker. As the red flare began to fizzle, Zeke turned back once toward the tree line. A shape moved behind the pines. Just for a second. Not snow. Not wind. Something, or someone, was following. Zeke kicked the cabin door open with his shoulder, snow pouring in behind him like a second storm. The place was dark, cold, and smelled of dust and firewood long untouched. It had once belonged to his grandfather. A forgotten hunting cabin tucked deep into the forest, miles from any main road. He hadn't stepped foot in it in over a decade, but instinct brought him back. He laid Raven gently on the faded leather couch, wrapped June in a blanket from a storage chest, and helped Lilith sit near the stone fireplace. The women barely spoke. Their eyes were far away, like their souls hadn't made it back yet. Nix paced the room, sniffing the corners, tail stiff and ears forward. Zeke knew that posture. The dog smelled something off. Not danger. Not exactly. But intrusion. Someone had been here. He checked the lock on the back door, broken. Clean snap. Recently done. His body tensed. He reached for the rifle mounted on the cabin wall. Still there. Loaded. Good. His instincts were alive now, screaming. The shepherd wasn't just out there. He had already been inside. As the fire caught and filled the room with flickering light, Raven stirred. Her voice came in a whisper. He said no one would find us. That we were offerings. Her eyes met Zeke's, haunted and hollow. But then he left. For someone else. Zeke knelt beside her. Did he say where? She shook her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. Only that the snow would cover the sin. Zeke clenched his jaw. This man wasn't just delusional. He had a belief system. A ritual. A timeline. And there were more victims coming. June sat on the floor near the fire, shivering. She reached into her coat and pulled something out. A torn piece of fabric. It was soaked, stiff, stained dark with dried blood. He made us each write something on this, she murmured. Confessions. Zeke took it gently. Written in shaky ink were words that chilled him to his core. I watched and did nothing. The phrase was repeated, over and over, like punishment. Like liturgy. Each girl had been forced to confront something, and then punished for it. Lilith hadn't spoken until now. Her voice came low and steady. He said pain cleanses. That the snow is like baptism. Zeke turned sharply to her. You knew him? Her silence was the answer. Her eyes didn't flinch. She knew more than she was saying. And for the first time, Zeke realized one of these girls wasn't just a victim. She might be the key to everything. The fire crackled, sending waves of warmth into the cabin. But the chill inside Zeke's spine remained. He watched Lilith closely from the opposite side of the room. The other two girls had finally drifted into uneasy sleep, huddled under blankets, their bodies recovering from the freeze. But Lilith, she hadn't closed her eyes once. She sat upright in the wooden chair, face half-lit by the flames, eyes locked on Zeke as if waiting for something, or daring him to ask. He finally spoke. You knew him. Lilith didn't blink. I knew what he believed. Zeke crossed his arms. There's a difference. She looked into the fire. Not to him. Her voice was different now, calm, almost detached, like someone who had long since accepted horror as a part of life. He found people who carried guilt, she said. Real guilt. The kind that eats your stomach in the middle of the night. That makes you wish someone else would punish you so you don't have to live with it anymore. Zeke's fists clenched unconsciously. So he plays God, he muttered. Lilith shook her head slowly. No, not God. He thinks he's the shepherd. He believes the lost deserve pain before they can be forgiven. He doesn't want to save you. He wants to break you clean. Zeke sat down across from her, rifle resting between his knees. "Why you?" he asked. "Why were you there?" Lilith looked directly at him, and for the first time, there was emotion in her voice. "Because I asked him to find me." The air inside the cabin dropped. Nick stopped pacing and stared at her, ears back. Zeke leaned forward, his voice a low growl. "What did you just say?" Lilith's hands trembled slightly, but she didn't look away. "I wrote him, months ago. There's a forum online, hidden. People go there to talk about their guilt. Some of them fake it. I wasn't faking. I wanted release. I didn't think he was real. Until one day he messaged me. Said he saw my truth." Zeke stood, pacing. The room suddenly felt too small. "You brought him here," he said under his breath. Lilith looked down. "I didn't know what he really was. I thought I'd be alone. I didn't know he'd take others." Her voice cracked now. "When I realized it was too late, I couldn't stop it." Outside, a low sound echoed through the trees, like a whistle carried by the wind. Nick stood up, growling deep in his chest. Zeke grabbed his rifle. The shepherd was near again, and this time he wasn't just watching. Zeke moved toward the window, rifle raised, eyes scanning the tree line. The whistle echoed again. Long, slow, deliberate. Not a bird, not the wind. It was a signal. Nick stood at the door, hackles raised, growling low, vibrating with tension. Lilith didn't move from her chair. She stared at the fire like it was the only thing keeping her from crumbling. "That sound," she said softly, "means someone's coming. He never comes alone." Zeke turned to her. "You said he messaged you. How many others are like him?" Lilith finally looked up. "Dozens. Maybe more. He calls them the flock." Zeke's stomach twisted. It wasn't just one predator out there, it was a network. A cult. And if they were close enough to signal, they were close enough to strike. "We need to move," he said. "Now." He woke the other two women, gently but firmly. Raven jolted, panicked, until Zeke whispered, "We're not safe here." June clung to her blanket, her lips trembling. "He's coming, isn't he?" Zeke didn't lie. "Yeah." He helped them to their feet, quickly assembling a survival pack, water, heat packs, a pistol, and the flare gun. He handed Raven a knife. "If anyone touches you, don't hesitate." Her fingers wrapped around the handle like it gave her power back. They exited through the back, staying low. Snow fell in heavy sheets now, erasing footprints almost instantly. Zeke led them toward a rocky ridge, a path he knew well. It led to a ranger's outpost 3 miles east. But they wouldn't get far if the flock had already surrounded the forest. As they moved, Nick stopped suddenly. He barked once, then darted left into the trees. "Nix!" Zeke hissed, following fast. What he found turned his blood cold. A man was hanging upside down from a tree, tied by the ankles. Shirtless despite the cold, skin bruised and carved with the same repeating words from the cloth June had shown him. "I watched and did nothing." His eyes were open, empty, dead. A symbol was burned into his chest. A ram's head, stylized, with a cross beneath it. Zeke stepped back. This wasn't a message. It was a warning. From the ridge above, a voice rang out. Deep, calm, familiar. "There is no forgiveness without pain, Ezekiel." Zeke froze. Only a handful of people alive knew his full name. The shepherd wasn't just hunting him now. He was calling him home. Zeke's breath clouded the frozen air as he stared up at the ridge. The voice was unmistakable, measured, smooth, and hauntingly familiar. It wasn't just a threat. It was personal. The shepherd wasn't reciting scripture. He was delivering a sermon, directly to him. The snow fell heavier now, but Zeke barely felt it. He turned to the others. "Down. Stay hidden. Don't move unless I say." Raven helped pull June behind a fallen tree while Lilith remained oddly calm, eyes scanning the darkness as if she were expecting this moment all along. A silhouette appeared at the edge of the ridge. A tall man, face masked, dressed in dark wool robes that blended with the night. He held no weapon, at least not visibly, but his presence was heavier than any rifle. "You've wandered far, Ezekiel," the man called out. "But not far enough. You never could outrun what you did." Zeke's heart pounded. He gripped his rifle tighter. He knew that voice, not just from today or from the woods, but from years ago. From war. "Afghanistan," Zeke muttered under his breath, realization blooming like frostbite. "You were there." The man nodded slowly. "We both were, but I found purpose when I came back. You just found silence." His voice sharpened. "You buried your guilt in snow. I lit mine on fire and watched it cleanse." Zeke didn't respond. He didn't have to. His past came roaring back. Memories of a village raid, of orders followed blindly, of civilians caught in the chaos. Regret had eaten him alive for years. Now it stood before him wearing a cloak and calling itself a prophet. "What do you want?" Zeke shouted. The shepherd raised a hand slowly, and behind him more figures emerged, half a dozen at least. Robes, masks, all silent, all watching. "You," he answered simply. "Not to kill, to finish what we started." Zeke shook his head. "You're sick," the shepherd chuckled. "We're the same, brother. The only difference is, I chose to remember." Before Zeke could raise his weapon, a sudden flash of movement to his left forced him to duck. An arrow slammed into the tree beside him. Nix growled, leaping forward toward the attacker hidden behind the snow-covered brush. Chaos erupted. Zeke fired toward the ridge as he grabbed June and Raven, pulling them back through the trees. Lilith didn't run. She stood still, her eyes locked with the shepherds across the storm. And then she smiled. She knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of Zeke's reckoning. Snow clung to Zeke's eyelashes as he ran, heart hammering in his chest like it was trying to escape his ribs. Behind him, the woods erupted with the sounds of footsteps, shouting, and the growl of Nix somewhere in the dark. June stumbled, but Raven pulled her forward. Zeke turned just long enough to see silhouettes moving through the trees. Faster now, closer. They weren't hunting anymore. They were closing in. Coordinated. Trained. This wasn't some backwoods cult with delusions. These were soldiers. Former. Like him. They didn't stop at faith. They turned it into warfare. Zeke found a small outcropping of rock and motioned for the girls to hide behind it. "Stay low," he ordered. "Don't make a sound." His mind raced. Everything was starting to come together, too perfectly. The shepherd hadn't just picked this forest at random. He had chosen Zeke's path. Led him here. This wasn't a chase. It was a trap. A stage for reckoning. Zeke checked the flare gun in his pack. One shot left. He didn't want to waste it unless he had no choice. Suddenly, a voice rang out behind him. Calm. Confident. "You remember the fire, don't you?" Zeke froze. He knew exactly what the shepherd meant. A mission in 2011. Kandahar province. A village suspected of hiding enemy combatants. Intel had been vague, but the order was clear. Burn it. Zeke had carried the torch. Followed orders. And afterward, the smoke didn't leave his lungs for weeks. He hadn't just burned buildings. He had burned people. Unarmed. Screaming. Faces he never forgot. Zeke turned slowly. The shepherd stood a few yards away now, unmasked. And just as Zeke feared, it was him. Gideon Shaw. Once a SEAL. Once his friend. Now something else entirely. Gideon's face was weathered but calm, like a man who had made peace with monsters. "They made us killers," he said, "and then told us to come home and smile. I couldn't." Zeke's jaw tightened. "So you built a cult?" Gideon chuckled. "I built judgment. You think I tortured those women? I gave them release. And you, Ezekiel, you're the final piece. The one who ran from what he did. The lamb who wouldn't kneel." Nix emerged from the trees, teeth bared, growling. Gideon didn't flinch. He stepped closer, slowly. "I want you to remember it all," he whispered. "And then I want you to choose punishment or penance." Zeke didn't answer. His finger hovered near the flare trigger, because the next choice he made wouldn't just decide his fate. It would burn everything. Zeke's hand gripped the flare gun tight. He could feel every heartbeat in his fingertips, every breath like a countdown. Gideon stood just 10 feet away now, his voice calm, eyes locked on Zeke's like they were still brothers. "You think this is revenge?" Gideon asked. "It's not. This is correction. You buried your guilt, Ezekiel. I lived in mine. I built something from it." His voice was so full of conviction it nearly cracked Zeke's resolve. Nearly. Behind the rock, Raven held June close as the girl trembled. They could hear every word, every breath. Lilith hadn't moved. She watched with an unreadable expression. Part awe, part horror. Something about Gideon still gripped her. Worship? Regret? Zeke couldn't tell. The cult members circled the perimeter like wolves, silent and ready. Zeke was outnumbered, outgunned, but not out of options. "I didn't come here for this," Zeke said through clenched teeth. "You think pain redeems? It doesn't. The scars." Gideon stepped closer. "Pain reveals. You want to be clean? Choose now. Confess. Kneel. And I'll let the girls go." Zeke's eyes narrowed. "You'll never let them go." Gideon nodded slowly. "You're right." In that instant, Zeke fired the flare straight into Gideon's chest. The blast was blinding. The flare ignited Gideon's coat, flames crawling up his body. He screamed, not in pain but in rage. The woods lit in flickering red, a signal Zeke hoped someone, somewhere, would see. Nyx lunged, tearing into one of the masked followers. Chaos exploded. Zeke grabbed June and Raven, pushing them into the trees. "Run! Don't stop!" Lilith stayed frozen in place, eyes locked on the burning figure of Gideon. Now on his knees, face illuminated by fire. He turned toward her. "Lilith," he gasped. "This was always your path." She didn't respond. Zeke raised his rifle and fired twice, one shot hitting another cultist, the second shattering Gideon's shoulder. The shepherd fell backward into the snow, flames still eating through his robes. The others hesitated, unsure whether to fight or flee. Their prophet was dying, and with him so was the illusion of invincibility. But Zeke knew it wasn't over. Not yet, because somewhere in that forest more were waiting. And Lilith still hadn't told the full truth. Smoke hung low over the snow-covered ground like a veil between the living and the damned. Gideon's body lay still near the tree line, his robe scorched, his face half-shadowed by flickering embers. Around him, the cultists had scattered into the trees, the illusion of purpose shattered by fire and bullets. Zeke crouched beside Raven and June, both shivering but alive. Nyx limped toward him with blood on his fur. Not his. He was still standing, still fighting. But one look into Lilith's eyes told Zeke the real war hadn't ended. She stood motionless, staring at Gideon's corpse like she was in mourning. Not shock, mourning. Zeke approached slowly, rifle lowered, but eyes sharp. "You need to tell me the truth," he said. "Now." She turned toward him, and something in her face changed. Softer, sadder, tired. "His name wasn't always Gideon," she whispered. "And mine wasn't always Lilith." Zeke felt his stomach knot. "Who are you?" She looked toward the fire, her voice barely a breath. "Evelyn Shaw, his sister." The name hit Zeke like a blow. He remembered now, a photo on Gideon's locker back in Kandahar. A young girl with dark eyes, a serious smile. "You helped him," Zeke said, voice cold. "You brought those girls. You kept them alive long enough to make it look like you were a victim." Evelyn nodded slowly, a tear falling. "At first, I believed. I thought we were saving people. He told me pain cleansed guilt. But it got worse. He stopped caring about redemption. He just wanted to see them break." Zeke stepped back, anger rising. "You let this happen." "I tried to stop it," she said. "I led you here. I knew only you could end him. He feared you, even more than he loved me." Her voice cracked. "You were the sin he never purified." The snow began falling again, soft and steady. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Zeke's flare had worked. Help was coming. But none of this felt like rescue. Zeke looked at Evelyn, no longer Lilith, and saw a broken woman who had been part of something monstrous, yet somehow wanted out, or maybe just wanted it all to be over. He turned to Raven and June, who now stared at Evelyn with a new kind of fear, not of a captor but of someone who had stood by. Zeke understood that fear too well. He'd lived in its shadow for years. The difference was, now, there were witnesses, and the truth wasn't buried in snow anymore. The sound of approaching engines broke the silence first. Then came the flood of lights through the trees. Flashing red and blue painted the snow like bruises. Paramedics, deputies, and federal agents poured into the clearing, weapons raised, voices shouting into radios. But the battle was already over. The women were found. The cult had scattered. And at the center of it all stood Zeke, bloodied, silent, and still holding the flare gun, now empty. June and Raven were quickly taken into blankets and stretchers, eyes wide, hearts still racing. They were safe but far from healed. Nix was loaded into the back of a patrol vehicle for medical care, his eyes never leaving Zeke. And Evelyn didn't resist. She stood with her hands behind her back, wrists exposed, like she had been waiting for this moment all along. As the cuffs clicked around her bones, she whispered, "He believed I was his disciple, but you were always the one he feared." Zeke didn't respond. He watched her taken away without a word. There was nothing left to say. She had made her choice, and so had he. The sheriff, an older man with a silver badge and decades of tired eyes, approached him. "You want to explain what the hell this is?" Zeke didn't answer immediately. He looked around, the fire smoldering in the snow, the body of a man who once called himself a brother, and the place where guilt had finally surfaced after years underground. "It's what happens when you don't bury the past," Zeke said quietly. "It comes looking for you, armed, with followers." Back in town, the media swarmed like vultures. They asked about the cult, about the seal-turned-savior, about the women who survived. Zeke gave no interviews, no statements, just silence. He visited Nix in the animal clinic every day. The dog survived, barely. Scars would remain, but so would the bond. They had both walked through hell and come out the other side. Weeks later, Zeke stood at the edge of the same forest, the snow beginning to melt under early spring sun. He didn't feel lighter. Guilt doesn't vanish. It sinks in, roots itself. But he had stopped running. And for the first time in years, the nightmares had quieted. He didn't believe in redemption, but he believed in choice. And this time he chose to live.